Hey everyone, you're joining me for a fantastic episode as our main focus is on about theming and how we as level designers use it to communicate to the players. Hey everyone, I hope you're well, playing and making the games that you all love. You're joining me, your host, Max Pez. It's an absolute pleasure to be back with you all, being able to talk more about level design, game development, and all of this good stuff. I hope that you have been well since the time that we last spoke. I think I'm just recording this just after myself and Dan recorded our episode about the book. So as you know, it's been around about a month since our last episode. Sadly, due to personal reasons, I had to take some time off. But as we talked about in the previous episode, the book is now out, the second installment in my level design series, Let's Design. If you haven't got it already, there'll be links to that down below, where you can pick it up, whether this be physical or that of the digital copy as well. All of this will be available for you. But before we go on, let's have a quick word from today's sponsor. Today's episode is brought to you by none other than Gamedev.tv. For those of you who don't know, they are a phenomenal resource which helps you who may not have any experience to those looking to grow and improve their experience and knowledge on game dev related tools, whether that be programming, design, or art. All of these you can find on their website. And not only are they a great resource, but they've teamed up with myself to give you a phenomenal discount. If you go on and follow through the links that I've got down below, which give you a range of courses, you'll find that there is amazing discounts of over 80%. Normally a course costs around about £200, but luckily with the codes that we've got, and should I say the links down below, you'll get them for what would be about 40 to 50 bucks, around that benchmark. So if you're looking to go for it, this is a great place to start your learning. I personally am going through the Unity Beginners 3D C# course myself, and I'm really enjoying it with great tutors like Rick and Sam, which have previously been on this podcast as well. So if you're looking to improve your skills, head no further than Gamedev.tv. All of the links to the great courses will be down in the description below. Now back to the episode. Without further ado, with all this waffling out of the way, let's kind of talk a bit more about the main topic of theming. For those of you who don't know, theming is what we call that of what your kind of main base around is. When you think about theming, that could be that of a horror theme, could be about romance, similar to that of your kind of design pillars, but an overall kind of feeling, interaction, an element that you are trying to emulate or create for that of the player or viewer to feel, and then applying it to your level itself. Now again, theming is not just used for level design, it is used in all types of design, art, many of that. The context that we're going to be talking about is in that of level design, obviously. So this is kind of where we're going to be taking it, and how do we actually take it and apply it, and kind of like why I believe it's important. After all, as I mentioned, it's not just being a feeling, it can be that of a location type that we want, certain type of venue or location as well. Theming can become in that in many shapes or form. Why I believe it is important is for many reasons. One, it helps bring consistency to your team, as well as the actual end product of that, of the level that we're all trying to make. As we know, there are many different designers, disciplines, all of that come in to make an amazing game and level. So this is one of the key things that helps you kind of, how do I say, put you all on the right page. Another thing for this is like, you get a chance to focus on making this theme sometimes stand out. When you think about that of Titanfall 2, they have some incredible levels just overall, but the two most memorable, especially for me, is the one where, and I've forgotten the actual mission name, so I do apologize, but the one where you obviously teleport in time back and forth, and that of the construction of the buildings and houses in the game as well. And that's all based on theming. They're theming around that of time travel as well as construction of houses, right? And they're able to push that and go further with it too. these are the kind of elements, shall we say, that you want to do as well, thinking about it. Now, you won't always get a chance, and not every, level needs to necessarily stand out, because you will then lose the overall theming or consistency for your game. So you've got to keep that in mind. As I said, this is like a branch of your core game pillars, which we've spoken about in previous episodes, as well as a previous blog I wrote as well. A link to that will be in the description down below, everyone, if you want to check that one out. Now, with that kind of in mind, knowing what is theming, why that's important, we can talk a bit more, how do we come up with it? It's really important to talk about right off the bat when you have your kickoff meeting, okay? You should be talking to that of your artists, your quest designers, cinematic designers, animators, all of these, to understand what do they think of when they hear the term that you're trying to theme around. If you're trying to theme around, should we say, horror, if you're trying to theme it around that of horror and then we're based inside of a hotel, then you might think of something like The Shining, which is very different to something like Alien, right? So now you're starting to narrow down. Then you can try to figure out, well, how did they do it? What is the themes around that? And especially for that of The Shining, a lot of that is the unease of breaking what is actually normal. You know, there's a famous video that goes around showing how when you actually try to, as I believe someone actually did a level design, tried to actually block out the hotel from The Shining to find out it wouldn't logically make sense. Doors are too close to each other, despite there being, you know, multiple supposed rooms close, which means they would have overlapped. Sometimes the doors would have led to nothing. Sometimes, you know, the turns or that you find inside that building, especially with that tricycle scene, wouldn't even be able to be contained in the outer shell, or should we say the exterior of the building that we see. And from there, you start to break this down. You know, again, you're not just trying to imitate. You'd find like, well, okay, do we have any mechanics to make it more horrifying? What can we do with the lighting? So as soon as you start to know your theme, communicate it with the team, right? Start to think about, again, what does each of you understand by that term? And start taking notes. This is when you're going to gather all the information. There's no such thing as a bad idea at all in these stages. This is, as we said, the phase to get as much as you can. From here, you'll then be able to start to dissect which actually is a positive thing to add, which doesn't really connect with everything that you've talked about, as well as that of, well, do you have time to get everything, right? You might try and request certain new mechanics. You might not have a long time to actually block out this level. These kind of things. So you can start to, again, put a priority list together, understanding what's the must, what would be great to have, and then what you just don't think is ever going to be given to you. But maybe, you know, by a pure miracle, you'd be able to actually go off and get that and then be able to implement it in your actual level itself. So that's the first one, your group kickoff. So now we know that, as I said, different teams are going to add different elements. Lighting artists are going to be able to come in and add their kind of more horror lighting, if you will, versus that of, say, environment artists coming with the unique textures on the floor for some, say, the carpet, as well as creating different assets to make it there. So we now, as level designers, need to understand what's available for us, right? What is it that we can do to help share that, so, and to guide everyone that follows after us in terms of the pipeline and the process to the next stuff.
At Level Design Lobby, we believe everybody has a story to tell. Hobbyist or student, freelancer or veteran, we made it our mission to unite those who share our passion for creating and developing great games. Thanks to our generous Patreon backers, we've been able to do just that. So if you've already pledged your support, thank you. If not, you too can ensure the future of Level Design Lobby, helping us to create even more exciting content, collaborations, interviews, and much more. With awesome perks and rewards, whether you're a seasoned professional or just getting started, you're sure to find something for you. Want to share tips, tricks, and advice with passionate, like-minded developers? Our awesome community Discord has you covered. Fancy practicing your level design, creating strong portfolio content, and having fun? Then try our level design weekends. Or perhaps you want to individually discuss your work, hone your skills, or level up your career? Then consider our one-on-one mentorships. If you share our vision, then go to patreon.com/Level Design Lobby for more information and to pledge your support. Thank you.
So from here, we've got a few things that I've wrote down, and there probably will be more. So if you do think of any more to this, just send me a message in case I missed any. It's always important for us to have a dialogue when we're going down and doing all this stuff. Okay, the first one is that of our geometry. When we're making our block out, it's important for us to think about the certain size of, how do we say, the rooms, the corridors. Do you want a colossal space, so you make it 35 by 50, these kind of elements? Or do you want a corridor that feels extremely tight, so it's only 2 meters wide, so it becomes very claustrophobic, versus that of, if it's more playful and joyful, then it might just be much kind of bigger, over to 4 meters, just to feel that you've got a bit more room in that. And you need to think, obviously, does that match the kind of metrics that you need for certain mechanics? Because it's all good having enemies, but if the player doesn't feel that they can dodge or move in time to get away from the enemies, then it can cause some frustration. So you need to think about that. We also need to think about the pacing of this. If it's a horror, there is kind of these more traditional, long, teasing moments, the build up, if you will, before the payoff of the revealing of what is the horrifying factor, to that of the jump scare. All of these need to be built up. So we need to think in the pacing terms. Okay, how long is it that we want to kind of hold back? How long is it that we want to build up those kind of tensions? So you'll do that through your pacing graphs. You'll be able to kind of learn from there what's the most important elements to it, and kind of much more from it. Now, not only that, we have certain gameplay elements, whether that be exploding barrels, different enemy archetypes, all of these. So for us, we need to think more about, if like I said, we're trying to make a more horror element. Well, okay, what enemies do we have that are quite horrifying? What enemies do we have that are quite frustrating for the player? If you think of that time travel, the time switch mission in Titanfall, I think part of the reason they use, obviously, the those beasts, those lizard-like beasts that attack you, is because they constantly press forward. They constantly chase the enemy. If it was that of more of like a sniper rifle, players wouldn't need to like always dodge necessarily, unless they're in a tight tunnel. When I say dodge, I mean switch between time periods. But because those creatures are constantly on the move, constantly on the hunt for you, the player, that's where the horror starts to come in. Or should we say the need to move, the need to dodge, because if I switch and that thing's right in my face, it's no longer going to be there. So I'm able to obviously move around and be okay. The other thing is it's showing a big contrast of the time differences. We have these kind of like destroyed buildings, so it's now inhabited by creatures, but when we switch back in time, it's an upright, state-of-the-art technological facility that has humans. So that's another great one, is by combining those enemies. So we've got an enemy that runs at us and attacks us, and then we have those enemies that shoot at us. And the way that they do that is they have obviously a certain combination of enemies, as well as the number of enemies that are shooting. So it become overwhelming for players when they're getting shot at. Okay, switch, let's go back, where I have to just worry about this one lizard versus these 12, armed to the teeth baddies that I've got to face. So again, when you're thinking about your theming, can you cause that? Like I said, they do that to make you want to switch by having these enemy combinations. It's the perfect to get you move and to get you to switch too. All of these are great for it. So again, think about that. What do we have at disposal? Now, if you're trying to make a more horror kind of themed game in Persona 5, for example, Persona 5 is not horror, right? It's clear as day. Yet you can still make it more horror themed. You don't need to necessarily execute on the same level as horror as a Silent Hill. But again, you can still take the certain enemies, the more scarier looking enemies, that kind of like the twisted nature of the architecture. Where are we basing it in? You know, they kind of had these grand buildings from a castle to kind of these pyramids. Well, where can we base it? If it was a cabin in the woods, okay, well, now we're starting to play on that, right? So again, I'm just showing and telling you that you don't necessarily just have to worry about, oh, but it's not a horror game. Maybe the theming doesn't match the overall pillars and design direction of the game. As I said, perfectly fine for us all. We're able to go off, use what we have, and move it through into that kind of direction of our theme. And this is kind of also another reason why I wanted to talk about theming for us. Because sometimes we get lost in our own levels or in our own game, because that's the one we're focusing on, especially if it's a sequel, right? You've got the foundations, which makes this game so good that you're like, oh, okay, well, why would I want to change it? Part of the reason you may want to change it is to keep the player engagement. If you've nailed it down or got your kind of level design process to that sweet science of what, you know, the overall kind of guidelines tell you, you need to obviously then learn how to break them. As we've talked about before, subverting expectations. It's okay to break rules once you've mastered them. It's these kind of things. The other thing is how does it tie in with the story? Like, to give an example with Cyberpunk, and a shout out to Miles here, and a bit of a spoilers if you haven't played it, but just stick along with me because I'll try to keep it a bit vague. Essentially, a character you know has been kidnapped, and you're trying to find them with your friend. And where we go find them is, we called it was the dollhouse. And you can see how Miles and the other team members were trying to really focus and hunker down on that element of, how do we say, the horror. Because it was a lot darker. You were constantly going down into the, you know, hell is further down, right? So you're constantly pushing the player further down. The lighting was more kind of colored. These kind of elements. Now, Cyberpunk is not a horror game at all. But you can see where his mind has gone, him and his team, as they're trying to make the shock and horror of how you find that character more horrifying, because it also can happen, and sadly does happen, to real people in terms of kidnapping, right? And this is kind of where you can kind of take it. So think about that. In one of my levels in I Fought the Law, Red Queen's Race, that has more of a detective noir kind of vibe, as we're trying to sneak into this warehouse in order to find that of the seedy underbelly of Night City, where we're in a warehouse, but actually there's a secret elevator that goes down to a club underneath, which only the rich know about. Again, playing on the elements of how, you know, how disgusting and how lavish the other side live, how they keep everything secret under lock and key, theming all based around that. Now I'm going to do breakdowns about some of my levels later. If you haven't seen already, you can visit my website, maxpairs.com, and where you can see all of my latest work on Cyberpunk. I've just released it as of recording this episode here, guys and girls. But yeah, that's kind of where we're going to wrap it up. Sadly, I wanted to talk about this more, but I've got another meeting right now. But yes, keep in mind theming. How can you tie it all together? It's important not just to make your mission stand out, but it's important to deliver that narrative. When you have the narrative of these characters, we as LDs, along with environment artists, lighting artists, are trying to tell that story through the world as well. Tell that if we're meeting a character in a certain location, that needs to tell us, you know, the mise en scène, which you use from filmmaking. How does that, if we're going to say someone's home and we're like, oh, this person's really erratic, they just have no respect for themselves. Okay, that apartment better be messy. You know, you'd see shelves stacked with books, and then also some weird kind of experimental equipment, you know, where it just doesn't make sense, where people stack, you know, DVDs on one side, books on another shelf. It starts to be like, what? Little things like this that can tell a lot about the character. Again, we can share that tied in with the theming of our levels. So I hope that this has helped. It is great to be back with all of you. I'm really happy, again, just to be able to talk to you. So I hope that you are having a great morning, afternoon, or night whenever you listen to this, and thank you. If you do have any questions that you want to reach out to me, you can do so on Twitter at MaxPairs. If you want to email in those questions, please go ahead to leveldesignlobby@gmail.com. And if you want to support the show to make sure that we keep making great content, please head over to patreon.com/level design lobby and you'll be able to get some great perks as well. Alright everyone, take it easy and we'll catch you all next time.